I want to start a little bit with some background about yourself so we can get to know you a little better and how you got to work at HUD and what you're doing there right now.
My journey really started in the health and housing space and working primarily on issues related to people experiencing homelessness, given the prevalence of health needs among that population and the lack of housing. But about 5 years ago, I started to focus in on the housing component because resources are so scarce when it comes to housing, but housing plays such a vital role for people and their ability to be healthy and to thrive. I worked at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities as the Vice President for Housing Policy there. Doing great work there led me to being able to be a part of the Biden-Harris transition team. It was a ton of fun, something I never expected I would get to do, moving from Texas with no job and coming to DC over 20 years ago to being able to be on the transition team was a joy. And it gave me an opportunity to get to know the HUD career staff and how dedicated and smart and just committed to providing housing for people with the lowest incomes they are, and made me want to join in that effort with them, knowing that that I could help with some of the details and being able to move things along, given my skill set of just being able to be really interested in the details and making sure that things move along, made me really excited to be able to come into HUD.
Yeah, it seems like it was a perfect fit. So that makes a lot of sense. And I know that you are the senior advisor for rental assistance. So wanted to ask you a little bit about that. I know a lot of our landlord members have received rental assistance. So I'd like to hear your take on where you are at with rental assistance, what you see coming up in the future to potentially help landlords and renters alike as we move forward out of COVID.
Yeah, so we've really tried to work on rental assistance with a multi-pronged approach, right? Trying to help people who are in housing stay housed, especially during the pandemic. It's not as if evictions weren't a crisis before. We've always had evictions, but they were happening, under the radar, and people were just accepting them as part of the fabric of the housing space. But during the pandemic, we realized that it doesn't have to be that way, that we can, with resources matched to the right people and places, we can make a difference when it comes to evictions. During the pandemic, we had evictions at a record low rate. And now we've seen, as resources have gotten expended, we're starting to creep back up toward pre-pandemic levels, but we can see what works. And so we're focused on how can we help state and local communities implement and continue the great best practices that they've started during the pandemic. And HUD has been working with the Department of Treasury to make sure that Treasury resources like the state and local relief fund dollars and can be used for housing assistance. Then we know that we need to help people gain access to housing, and that's where programs like the Emergency Housing Voucher Program come into play, recognizing that people experiencing homelessness need special help and help that's more long lasting than you could get in the emergency rental assistance program. So we are doing everything we can to lease up what we expect will eventually be about 70,000 vouchers to people experiencing homelessness, people fleeing domestic violence situations, and those who are at immediate risk of homelessness. And that's very exciting. And then HUD has been supportive in all the other ways that we can help people increase income, like make sure people have access to tax credits and other income supports that the administration and Congress have put forward during the pandemic.
That's fantastic. And I think if I'm not mistaken, I had heard that there were about 200,000 housing vouchers that were going to be issued in coming time. Is that still the number that they're at? Is that more than usual? And also, how does that affect landlords, and what incentives are there then for landlords to accept those vouchers?
That's what the president has proposed in his FY23 budget request. So those vouchers aren't on the street. Those are what we've asked Congress to try to fund for next year. It would be a record increase to the voucher program and helping us make progress to the day when rental assistance would be universally available to everyone. But we did get an increase for this year in the voucher program. Congress gave us a little over $2 billion extra in the voucher program for vouchers. We think that we'll be able to get up to about 25,000 vouchers out of those resources. We have some flexibility in developing the formula for how those vouchers get distributed. So we don't know the precise numbers, but we think we'll get really close to 25,000 vouchers out on the street. While Congress has asked us to prioritize people experiencing homelessness and survivors of domestic violence, they're not solely for those populations. So we'll be able to make a little bit of a dent in the number of people who are on housing authority waiting lists. But as you said, it's not just about having funding for the voucher. There are things that we need to do, and creating landlord incentives is really important and a priority for the administration, because landlords are able to voluntarily participate in the voucher program. We need to do things to bring them along, bring them into the program. It also helps with geographic diversity. Too often voucher holders are segregated into low-income communities, and especially if those voucher holders are Black and brown people. So we need to do more to incentivize landlords to come into the program, especially landlords from a wider array of geographic locations. We're experimenting with ways to do that. One is that this year we received additional resources for housing authorities' administrative fees. Those are the flexible dollars that they're able to use to try out new strategies of bringing landlords into the program. We also have additional resources for what we call mobility services that are a part of our community choice program. So that directly gets at what I was talking about with landlords, with needing to recruit landlords from more affluent neighborhoods that are typically predominantly white neighborhoods, doing things like creating flexible pools of resources that landlords can use to repair damage if there's damage to the property, or upgrade the property to help meet inspection criteria, things like that. And what we find, actually, especially when it comes to having a pool of resources that landlords can use for damage or other things like that, that communities don't end up using those resources because voucher holders take care of their property and they don't damage. And so it's laying into one of the stereotypes of voucher holders, but giving landlords the protection around that, and then showing how we're busting that myth, because communities don't often have to spend much of those resources, if anything at all, because properties are well maintained and people respect their units. We also have the moving to work demonstration amongst the public housing authorities. That program allows us to tell PHAs, hey, there's this new thing we want to study. And in this case, it's landlord incentives. So you be really creative with landlord incentives, let us study it. And in exchange, we'll give you flexibilities within the voucher program in particular to allow you to use resources more flexibly, ask us to be able to have more flexibility within the rules and regulations of the program in exchange for testing out whatever topic we've decided. In this case, we have a moving to work demonstration pilot, a group of public housing authorities studying landlord incentives and what is it that landlords, the PHAs, can implement to bring landlords into the program. We've asked for more of these kinds of resources for FY23 in the president's budget to continue doing those things.
That's great. And you are so right. There are definitely a lot of misperceptions about the housing voucher program. That's why we have you here to talk to us about it. So it sounds like the program is only going to get better from here on out, hopefully, with your help. So the other thing I wanted to talk about with you is renter protections. It's definitely top of mind for landlords. During the pandemic, we saw many new renter protections due to emergencies, but some of those seem to be here to stay, such as just cause evictions, anti-discrimination of income, tenants' right to legal representation. Which one of those, or do you see any of those protections long-term being something that at a federal level could be implemented to help tenants?
So It has been great, the innovations that have happened at the local level. And most of those, that's where it's the appropriate place for those innovations to happen. What we can do at the federal level is promote and incentivize communities to make progress and keep innovating and to continue the programs that they've been able to stand up. So in particular, for example, within HUD, we're looking at ways to use our housing counseling program and the folks that help connect with renters and homeowners to help them navigate through crises and help renters move into homeownership, help homeowners maintain their housing. But they've also played a critical role in the eviction prevention work in Philadelphia, which is one of the examples that's been lifted up by the White House. It's been HUD housing counselors that played a significant role there. And that partnership between the housing piece and the court piece is another thing that's been great to watch. Courts really looking at themselves as a place to prevent evictions and not simply process evictions has been fantastic. And so that's another way that the federal government, the Department of Justice has done an excellent job of engaging court officials and lawyers to understand how the emergency rental assistance program works, their role in it, and how to equate evictions more an eviction court, more like a services court or a special needs court, like we do with veterans courts or drug courts or mental health courts, where we're there to help people navigate the system and not just simply for punitive actions.
That's fantastic. I do agree that that would make a big difference in being more preventative. Another issue that some landlords have had is deciding how to interpret or use criminal background checks. Many states are being proactive in having sort of ban the bucks or limiting or restricting criminal background checks for landlords. So I'm wondering, on HUD's end, we haven't heard any new guidance in a while. Is that something that potentially could come up as an update within the next couple years?
On April 20th, the Secretary, as a part of Second Chance Month, asked HUD staff to review our internal guidance and policies related to criminal histories and the ways that criminal histories can and should not be taken as a part of tenant screening practices. She's asked us to come back in 6 months with recommendations on how to improve access to housing for people with criminal histories or those who are who are about to exit out of jails and prisons. This is really exciting for all of us. People too often are face a barrier to housing, and we know that housing can play a fundamental role in preventing people from returning to jails and prisons and making sure that they're able to have a stable life upon reentering into the community. There are studies around this in Denver, for example. They've engaged in a social impact bond initiative that's shown that they can save money by providing housing and services for people who have repeatedly been in jail or prison, but places face barriers to replicating that because too often landlords and owners are restricting access to housing for people with criminal histories that's way broader than what is allowed by law and particularly could be subject to fair housing complaints.
Okay, thank you for providing an update on that. We look forward to hearing more about it. And also, I know Secretary Fudge has a very ambitious vision for HUD and affordable housing. And I'm wondering, what are some of the initiatives that you can share with us that would help to ensure more housing supply and stability, and how that might play into landlords and what they're doing?
Sure. So first and foremost is from the President's FY23 budget request. And there is a $35 billion proposal to increase housing supply using HUD programs. What we know at HUD is that our resources are what are needed at the table in order for properties to be deeply affordable. Programs out of Treasury like the low-income housing tax credit bring rents down a little bit to people with modest incomes, but to make housing deeply affordable for people with little to no income, HUD resources have to be layered on top of that. In addition, what we're finding is that it's hard for people to create small to medium-sized developments. The low-income housing tax credit over time has steadily increased. The size of the typical low-income housing tax credit property has steadily increased over time. When in the beginning years of the program, the average property size was about 67 units. Now it's well over 100 units. So people in the middle, and especially places, not every community needs 100 or 200 unit building. Smaller 10, 25, 50 unit buildings fit better in most communities. And so that $35 billion proposal is meant to help those kinds of properties so that we can reduce the number of financing resources that are needed to create affordable housing. The voucher proposal is also another way to support supply. Those subsidies can be project-based and coupled with new developments so that we're ensuring that properties are deeply affordable. And we can't forget about the public housing stock. The public housing stock has been deteriorating over time. We need to put investments into it so that we preserve that as an affordable housing source in the community, and that we can integrate it into the mainstream housing stock so that we're continuing to increase supply for people at every income level, because it's not until we do that that we'll be able to solve the affordable housing crisis.
Absolutely. And I like that you use the term deeply affordable, because I think that just being able to barely get by is not enough. And it is a struggle for so many Americans more than ever now, that is something we absolutely do need, is to make it deeply affordable. So I want to finish off with one last thing, which is maybe some action items that you can give to our landlord members and how they can help with the nation's affordable housing crisis.
Sure. So first and foremost is to be engaged in your communities, especially when it comes to zoning and other local decision tools that are required in order to be able to advance affordable housing development. Making sure that you're at those city council meetings or those community planning and development meetings where just key decisions are made around zoning and other tools that communities have in their toolbox. The other piece is for you landlords that do accept vouchers and have voucher tenants, talking about your experience with accepting HUD assistance. We know that over the course of the pandemic, landlords that accepted HUD assistance did better than other landlords because you had a dependable renter who was paying their rent. The housing authorities worked with tenants to make sure that their rents were adjusted and if they lost income, and that helped provide a lot of stability in the market for people holding vouchers, but also letting us know the ways that we can improve. One example that shows how we listen is how we're evolving our inspections process. We've done listening sessions with residents and landlords, and you participating in those is really important to make sure that we're doing all that we can to streamline our processes, to make sure that landlords get paid and that tenants stay stably housed and they're housed in safe and healthy living conditions. So those are some ways I think landlords could be really, really helpful.
Well, thank you so much. I hope that some of our landlords listening to this will take that into mind as they move forward. I really appreciate your time, Peggy. This has been a fantastic conversation and much needed one, honestly. So I really appreciate having you and your whole team join in. And I hope we can connect again soon so that we can get more updates from you as time goes on. I do think we really need to be in the know of what's happening so we can help the affordable housing crisis and all of the issues that are going on with that. So I really appreciate your time.
No, it's my pleasure. And thank you for lifting up these important issues.